All right, well, welcome back to the afternoon session here, the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs, which is hilarious as always. And we are here picking up our work on H495, the Middlebury Charter Amendment Bill, and I believe Ashley has an amendment to present to us. So thanks for working on that over the break.
Of course, my pleasure. As we stated before, my name is Ashley Angel, law clerk at the Office of Legislative Counsel. I am here on an amendment for H495, the Charter of Middlebury changes. So before the break, you had requested an amendment to change from annually beginning to beginning in Section 3, which is the transitional provision of H495. So essentially what this allows for the town to do, it allows for the town treasurer to serve without having to be appointed each year until the town select board appoints a new treasurer. The rest of the bill is the same. That is the only change. Any questions for me?
So just to put the explicit point on it, this will reduce any suggestion that there is a term limit on the new appointed treasurer, that it's whatever their contract or appointed term is from the select board. Okay.
Cookie cutter of Valberg.
Yep, same.
It's a contractual versus a finite period.
Exactly.
All right. I did reach out to Representatives Shy and McGill, and they forwarded my inquiry on this topic to a couple of town officials who both weighed in. I believe it was the town manager. Looking for the titles here to make sure I'm accurately talking about the right people. But there was unanimous from both of the reps and the town officials that yes, their intent was to have, the flexibility in the term of the appointment. So they appreciated the catch and would like us to strike the word annually as reflected in the amendment. So any further discussion or questions about that? All right, I would entertain a motion to find favorable H495 when amended by draft 1.1 before.
So move.
All right, Representative Higley has moved that we find H495 favorable when amended by this draft 1.1 amendment. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk shall commence to call the roll.
Representative Byron?
Yes.
Representative Boyden, yes. Representative Hango?
Yes.
Representative Morgan?
Yes.
Representative Cooper of Burlington?
Yes.
Representative Murphy?
Yes.
Representative Chase?
Yes.
Representative Waters Evans?
Yes.
Representative Cooper of Randolph?
Yes.
Representative Nugent? Representative Higley?
Yes.
Representative McCarthy?
Yes.
11-0-1.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley, for the great work there. And Representative Morgan has volunteered to be the reporter on this one.
Already got it ready.
It's easy. Efficiency. We were ready for this charter week, I'll tell you. Great. So that will do it for H495. So we're going to now pick up on our walkthrough with Tucker on H503, which is the Town of St. Johnsbury Charter. So just while Tucker's sitting down, we're going to finish our walkthrough and see who we've got to do a little bit of homework and communication on the preparation of hopefully an amendment to address some of the concerns we brought up this morning as we did the walkthrough, explore some of the reasoning behind some of these things and see if we can focus a few of those sort of areas of broad authority that are in the initial bill as introduced. And then we'll come back to this one in a week or so once that subcommittee has had the opportunity to work on this one a little bit. So I wanted to at least finish the walkthrough today, get that committee working on some of that. It seemed like there were at least a couple folks who are interested in diving into some of these issues and learning a little bit more and trying to find a path forward for the St. Johnsbury Charter. Then we're going to take a quick break, and then Ben is going to come in and talk to us about a bill that Representative Lalonde asked us to do a drive-by of S6, which I know absolutely nothing about, but we're going to take a few minutes to look at that, and that'll be our work for this afternoon. So, back to H503. Tucker, thank you for sticking with us through this. I think we had gotten to page 28, subchapter 7, water and wastewater was where we had left off.
That is correct. And subchapter 7 has one section, section 701, which states that the town may repeal ordinances relating to the management, operation, maintenance, replacement, and extension of a town water and wastewater system. And it provides for the repair of those systems. Two brief things to flag here. The first is whether the intent is for the select board to have this authority. And the reason I ask that question is that under the general law, your water commissioners generally have authority to do things, and they use the term the town. I'm guessing that this would still devolve on whoever is the legislative body in charge of the wastewater system in the town. They may want to specify that it's a select board. The other thing that I would flag is that there are procedures in general law for how wastewater systems may be extended. And this is one of the areas where in the past, there's been some sensitivity around the application of special assessments for capital improvements to extend water systems. Because that's one of the areas where a town can assess on property owners a direct and specific tax to fund the extension of a water line. And under Chapter 87, that is something where the property owners are typically given the opportunity to consent to the extension of the line. But there are instances where municipalities can vote to extend water lines even with the objection of specific property owners who may not want to connect, but would still be subject to an assessment.
Does this supersede that by giving this town this authority? It sort of says that they would, or could it be harmonized with that?
This is not as express as the general law, so it would likely be harmonized with the procedures, more specific procedures that are set out in Chapter 7 and the water systems. But I would note that there is a historical precedent, and this was done with the Edward Farrar Utility District, which was formerly known as the Village of Waterbury. The General Assembly with some of these general provisions just to make it crystal clear that this was not a deviation from the standard practices for making assessments and for rate making under the general law, went in and added references to Chapter 89, Chapter 91, and Chapter 95 of Title 24, which is potable water, sewerage, wastewater. Maybe not in that order.
All right.
The miscellaneous subchapter, and I'll harken back again, call back to the town manager's suggestion that this would be the appropriate subchapter for the call out for funding of the museum. In section 801, the town is establishing the Charter Review Committee, required that every 5 years, the select board will appoint the committee. It will consist of not fewer than 5 nor more than 9 members from among the residents of the town. That committee is going to review the charter and recommend changes that it finds necessary or advisable. The committee is required to prepare a written report in time for those recommendations to be submitted to the select board for review, not later than 1 year after the appointment of the committee. So a minimum of every 6 years, there may be recommendations to amend.
Representative Hanka.
I apologize. May I go back to subchapter 7, please, on the wastewater and water systems?
Mm-hmm.
So does this give like a blanket authority that for instance, the town can have, I don't know, stricter regulations. I don't even know if it's possible than the state already has for instance, inciting a septic system, or is this particularly municipal wastewater? And water and wastewater systems. Okay, so it doesn't sound like it would apply to septic systems. It just sounds like it's municipal systems.
This language is likely just talking about the municipal systems, and the clarification of whether this is simply assigning duties that already exist in law to, for example, the select board in lieu of some other body, or whether the intent here is to set aside the general law and just give blanket legislative authority to their select board to adopt ordinances governing extension, repair, maintenance, installation, and rate setting. And rate setting is where that Edward Farrar Utility District amendment referencing the general law really came into play, because the concern was that some of the rate setting provisions in those chapters are very specific, and there are bases in those rate setting chapters around, for example, when and how municipalities can assess the rates based on grand list value of property versus actual usage versus the cost of maintenance and repair of the system. Rate setting the calculus can get complicated sometimes.
Thank you.
All right. Back in section 801, the Charter Review Committee. The Charter Review Committee is going to make the recommendations to the Select Board. This section wraps up by saying that the Select Board still has the discretion to place those recommendations for amending the charter on the ballot. This doesn't alter the existing landscape for petitioning, for example, for a charter amendment through 17 VSA 2645. Section 802. This is the charter borrowing. It states that the town shall have authority to adopt any charter provision approved for any other municipality without seeking approval from the General Assembly. There are gradients of my certainty in the legal analysis around constitutionality. This lays on perhaps the most extreme end, where I'm very certain that this chafes against constitutional authority. The Supreme Court of Vermont has said that any delegation of legislative authority that puts anyone besides the legislature in the place of actually selecting the words of the delegating statute is unconstitutional. And essentially what this allows the town to do is, within a fairly limited scope, which is the universe of charters that you have in Title 24 Appendix, it would allow them to grant themselves authority through their charter, which is a statute, and they would be selecting the words that they're taking from other municipalities' charters. Again, state law.
So committee, I think you probably got a sense from my reaction to discovering that this provision was in here in our overview yesterday, that I think any future draft of this bill should strike this entire section unless there's any objection from the committee on that.
I concur with the chair.
Yeah, I think given Tucker's, he does not give us that kind of constitutional recommendation lightly. And this is one we've seen, and I know several towns have put this kind of language before us, but I don't think it's a delegation of authority we are ever going to do, given our current constitutional structure. Yes, Representative Hango.
Quick question. Did they take this from the Bennington Charter? So does this exist in the Bennington Charter? Okay. This is not one of the things that so they assumed that this was an okay thing to do when they wrote this.
I don't know the analysis that happened at the local level, and this is a very good time for me to say that although Section 802 as presented is very likely unconstitutional, That doesn't mean that that the bill can't pass with this section in it, that the authority can't be given to the town. It would essentially make it so that any authority they did adopt would be subject to being overturned by a court if someone sued the town and said, Section 802 is unconstitutional and the authority that you're attempting to exercise is therefore unconstitutional. And it would take one person to essentially overturn, this portion of the election here. And it wouldn't be unheard of. There have been constitutional challenges to charter provisions fairly frequently over the last couple of years.
Representative Hickman.
Well, like you said, Mr. Chair, this is, a number of towns have attempted to do this recently. And we've understood that it's a concern.
I think that there's, I want to say, since there isn't somebody sort of speaking on behalf of towns as the devil's advocate, or maybe even the kind of thing I've heard from at least one person from the League of Cities and Towns, is that there's a little bit of a chafing at the Dillon's Rule provisions from at least some municipalities, where they really feel like they should have more ability and more flexibility to adopt ordinances that they want to adopt without having to go through this process. So I want to acknowledge that, but also say, we're invested with our responsibility and have to behave accordingly. So we'll if we do move this bill forward, I would say we'll strike this section, and then we can resolve that for this particular, for St. Johnsbury anyway.
All right, section 3 is a bit of a pause on the substantive stuff. These are pure redesignations. So each of the listed sections in chapter 151, 1, 12B, 15, 16, and 21 get redesignated. The town is moving this language, but not altering it at all. Section 4, this is another redesignation, but they had an amendment in this section. So if you fast forward through a lot of the struck language within this particular taxation provision, let's see here, where and when did they add language? They did not. So in the new section 804, they're maintaining subsections A through D and eliminating the remaining language in this section. Okay. Moving on to page 36. You're almost to the end. Section 5, this is the language that I flagged yesterday as interesting. There's no legal issues here to my knowledge, but in the current section 6 of the St. Johnsbury Charter, which is going to be redesignated to section 807, they have the process for the abolition of fire districts. I noted yesterday, called it dissolution. The term abolition is used here, which there's actually a distinction there, and that it would be both dissolved and forever prohibited if they actually abolish a fire district. And at the end of this section, they add new language to clarify that any existing debt service shall be assessed as a special assessment to those properties within the fire district at the time of its abolition. Sections.
Representative Marooky, member.
So that designation sounds like forever and ever. As our lawyer here, would you advise us to accept that language or to amend it to dissolution? Or maybe we need to find out if that's what they really want.
I would suggest the latter. I don't know what the town wanted back in the day. If there was an outbreak of fire districts in the town and they decided that you get one shot and you need to dissolve it, it's gone forever.
Outbreak.
Perhaps a better question would be, is there any precedent of that term being used?
Applied in that way.
Well, and So the word abolition is from their existing,
Correct.
that this isn't like new language or this is actually a section that's just renumbered from their existing charter. So that's another item for the 807 abolition versus dissolution. Okay. Good question for our working group to go.
Last page, page 37, in section 6, there's another redesignation with a small amendment. This is related to the Department of Assessment, and the amendment at the end of subsection C allows the Department of Assessment to be able to hear grievances with respect to the grant list. So this fits in with the tax provisions we went through earlier, where there's multiple layers of valuation and tax appeal. And the Department of Assessment, at least here, is intended to be the primary, potentially, entity hearing the grievances, so that may need to be cleared up about where the overlapping jurisdiction between the Board of Civil Authority, the Board of Listers, and here the Department of Assessment is for purposes of the town. And it may just be that the reference to the Board of Listers earlier in the charter is inadvertent, and that the intent is to have the Department of Assessment and the Board of Civil Authority. Okay. Section 809 is another redesignation, and these are mostly technical corrections, replacing an internal cross-reference from section 18 to section 808, and replacing board with department. Section 8 states that this bill shall take effect on passage. So every time I have run a marathon, I am reminded that it is a 20-mile run and then a 6.2-mile race. So I think you did the 20-mile run earlier today and you just finished up the 6.2-mile race. So congratulations on getting through 503.
All right. So Representative Waters Evans, sounded like you were interested in the academic and policy charge before us here. Are there other volunteers who might like to be on a subcommittee to work with our colleagues from St. Johnsbury and some of their local officials to see if we can work on an amendment? Representative Hooper, you're willing to volunteer? That sounds good. Representative Byron? All right. Anybody else? Representative Higley, do you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, I can help out as well.
I think I'd love to have one veteran of former GovOps on there. So great. So we have our 4 folks on the subcommittee. So your charge is, and I've written down some notes, and I think you all probably have written down some notes, is to take a look at especially the areas where we have questions. So I think on like 802, that issue is resolved. We just won't see that in the next amendment. But with other sections, just making sure, when we talk about the use of firearms versus discharge, I think there are some pretty clear suggestions on a couple of things like that could get us to where we need to be and harmonize the language here with, authority that we're used to delegating. A couple of them, though, they're real decisions that we need the town's input on. This last one, for instance, around are we really talking about a Department of Assessment, or are we trying to give power to Board of Civil Authority? How does it actually work with the way that they restructured their appeals process? So those are that list of things. Once resolved, I think could get us to a place where we've got a focused, refined version of this that could be acceptable to the committee and hopefully the folks in St. Johnsbury. So that would be my goal. We probably, if we can knock those things out in a week or so, we could pick this back up week after next, or whenever you all are ready. But I would say if you could try to do an organizing meeting in the next 2 or 3 business days, and then work a little bit next week. I want to give our Senate colleagues some time with this bill if we do manage to get a version that we're happy with. Representative Hango.
Thank you. This could have been decided while I was out of the room earlier. Did you decide that the date of April 1st was problematic in terms of the district taxes? Is that something that we need to look at as well?
I recall, I think where we got is that we need to more clearly define the process, because the date referring to the ownership is probably okay, but then it's the what happens after and what's the sequence of events and what date do those fall on is somewhat ambiguous. So that does need to be clarified. So I think the April 1st date was okay, just in terms of saying whoever is the owner at that date is who's going to get the notice. But then it's the question of how the assessment's actually calculated and applied and the timing of that notice. That's a little vague in the language, at least as we understood it.
And there were also questions on section 102. There were 5 questions and you only addressed one of them, which was the use of or discharge of firearms. There were 4 others that were questioned.
Yep, I got those in my notes too.
Yeah, that is.
That's one of the sections that I got down here.
So the subcommittee, that's a good point, Representative Hango, should be looking at all of those
enumerations.
Additional power enumerations.
And section 302 bicycles.
Oh, I've got at least
Okay.
5 flags on my notes.
Well,
Yeah, I'm looking at about 10 on mine, so.
Well, I think I got like, those are like the big headers with some flags with under those headers, yes, with it.
Okay. Great, so I will leave it to you 4 who volunteered, and really appreciate your willingness to see if we can pare this down a little bit and get something that'll work.
So did Ben, if he could come a little earlier?
Yeah, so we'll take a 15-minute break and see if we can get Ben more like 10 of instead of 3 o'clock, and give everybody a chance to get organized. So we'll adjourn and go off live until